Okay, so I said yesterday we were going to move on past benching, but I had a change of heart after we hung up. Figured let's just touch again a little bit on some of the other inserts into benching. So we covered basically the four blessings of the benching. We covered the harachamans, and we mentioned initially about the inserts that are made during benching. So if you look back on page, really beginning before the benching, right? So beginning already on page 88, you've got the two columns. You've got what you say during the weekdays, and then what you say on Shabbos, on festivals, and on days that Tachanun is not said, which would be the narrower column, the more uplifting and positive spin or take perspective on Jerusalem, rather than the more mournful one that is on in Al Nares Bavel by the rivers of Babylon. So it depends on the nature of the day, and then you would choose the proper column to begin benching. Then we had the insertion that's made when you have a minyan. We say God's name. Right. Then we talked about the V'al Hanisim, which is the special insertion for Chanukah and Purim, which is done in the second blessing in Noidalacha, just like it's done in the Amidah during the blessing of Thanksgiving. Then we covered, we didn't talk about this, we'll get to in a moment, to the bottom of page 91. So on the bottom of page 91, we have two columns, you'll notice. You've got Re'enu and Re'enu. So during the weekdays, we say Re'enu, which means shepherd us, tend to us, take care of us. Re'enu means our shepherd. So the words are basically the same, really. The cholam in Re'enu, you can even read the word Re'enu if you didn't have the vowels, right? So why do we substitute Re'enu for Re'enu? Because Re'enu, we're asking God, we're saying, God, our Father, tend to us and feed us, sustain us, and so on. But on Shabbos and on Yom Tov, we're not supposed to ask for our needs. So therefore, we don't say Re'enu, we just say Re'enu, our shepherd, without explicitly asking for our needs. We just say our shepherd who nourishes us and so on. So that would be one difference between Shabbos and festivals and the weekdays. Then we have, of course, the insertions here on page 92. We talked about Ritzei for Shabbos. It gets added here. On festivals or Rosh Chodesh, we would add Ya'aleh V'yaveh, which is on the bottom paragraph. And just something to point out, you'll notice in Ya'aleh V'yaveh, you'll see the line, B'yom Tov Mikra Kodesh Hazeh, this holy festival day. So that line is omitted on Chol HaMoed, because on Chol HaMoed we don't say Yom Tov, this festival day. It's a festival, it's a festive day, but not to the same level. And also Rosh Chodesh is not called a festival. So you would omit that line. So this line, B'yom Tov Mikra Kodesh Hazeh, would only be if it's on the holidays of Pesach, of Shavuos, of Sukkot, of Shemini Atzeres, Simchas Torah, and on Rosh Hashanah. Then you would add that. And then you'll notice, of course, the amens in the bracketed text. That's because when the leader leads the benching, so he finishes all the paragraphs out loud, kind of like the chazan during davening. And when you say Ya'aleh V'yaveh, so he will recite this part out loud. And then everybody who's participating in the benching would answer Amen after these three phrases, just as we would do in the repetition of the Amidah. Okay, so that's the Ya'aleh V'yaveh. Then we have again this gray box here, and that's if one omitted, mistakenly forgot to say Ritzei or Ya'aleh V'yaveh. So you have all these different combinations depending on what day it was and what you forgot to say. That's why you've got a full page of this. But this is basically for somebody who forgot to say Ritzei on the previous page or Ya'aleh V'yaveh on the previous page. So this would be an insertion here, a blessing, because it's integral to the blessing after meals to mention those days when reciting the blessing after meals. Okay. Then we have on page 95, we've got another gray box with more insertions. These are additional harachamans to recite on special days. So you've got the harachaman for Shabbos, the one for Rosh Chodesh, one for festivals, one for Rosh Hashanah, and then one for Sukkot. Okay, and somebody who forgot to say the Al Hanisim and on Chanukah or Purim would add it here, as you can see that line, harachaman v'yasal Al Hanisim, and it would be inserted here if you forgot to say that in its place. Then you've got here again one final difference between weekdays and special days is Magdil and Migdal. So the verse here is we're saying Magdil or Migdal Yeshuas Malkai, right? You either call God Magdil, he gives great deliverance, or Migdal, he is a tower of deliverance to his king and bestows kindness upon him. So this verse appears in two places. It appears in Psalms, and it appears in the book of Samuel. Okay, Psalm 18 is basically almost word for word can be found, if off the top of my head, I think it's Psalm 18, right? It's Psalm 18. Yeah, let me see in the bottom here.
Yeah, it says below, Psalm 18.
Psalm 18, 51. Yeah, so that psalm is basically almost word for word from a chapter in Samuel, in the book of Samuel. It's like a sort of a confession of King David. And Psalm ends with Magdil Yeshuis Malkai, with this verse, Magdil Yeshuis Malkai, that God gives great deliverance. But on holidays, on festivals, we don't quote that verse. We actually read the other verse. We read the verse Migdol Yeshuis Malkai, which is spelled Magdil in the book of Samuel, but pronounced Migdol, which means that he's a tower of deliverance, which is greater sort of deliverance. I think it might be related to what we said before, perhaps about Re'enu and Re'enu. We're not asking for needs. So saying Magdil Yeshuis Malkai is almost like, I mean, it's not exactly asking God to deliver us, but Migdal is a tower of deliverance. In fact, the commentaries on the prayers note that there's a verse in Isaiah. The verse in Isaiah is Chodesh v'Shabbos Kroi Mikra. The verse, so whatever, it's part of a prophecy of the prophet Isaiah, but they take those words in Isaiah to mean, it's sort of like an allusion to this fact that when on Shabbos and Chodesh, Rosh Chodesh and Shabbos, and that would the same would apply for Yom Tov, which is also sometimes in some places called Shabbos, Kroi Mikra, read scripture. So rather than quote the verse from Psalms, which is from the writings, we quote from scripture from the prophets, and we quote that verse. So we read that verse, Migdal Yeshuis Malkai, from Isaiah. Anyway, then at the end here you have the blessing Hagafen, because as we said, benching, blessing after meal should be recited over a cup of wine. You find it more common when we have a minyan, but really, as I mentioned, that Hayom Yom, it talks about doing it even when you have three. And really, even if you're reciting a blessing after meal yourself, you can also recite it over a cup of wine. So at the end of the benching, you finish the benching, you finish the blessing after meal, and then you pick up the cup of wine again. Because remember, we said when you're reciting a blessing over a cup of wine, you start from the Rabbi say, the attention gentleman, from those preliminary verses. You're holding the cup in your hand, you hold it all the way through Bonei Beracham Yerushalayim Amen until the end of the first three blessings. Then you can put the cup down, and then we make the Hagafen. We pick the cup up again, recite the Hagafen, and you drink the cup. And then tomorrow, God willing, we'll get into the blessing after certain foods. One which, if you made a blessing on wine right after benching, you would be required to recite an additional after blessing. So we'll, God willing, get to that tomorrow.